imagine everyone can hear me. I want to begin by thanking Magers and Quinn. Thank you so much, Rachel, for coordinating and hosting Johanna and me tonight. Big fans of Magers and Quinn, big fans of, well, I'm a big fan of independent bookstores, small presses. Long live the poets, long live the writers and the artists, long live the readers. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. I also want to acknowledge the Minnesota State Arts Board and say that I'm a fiscal year 2024 recipient of a Creative Individuals grant from the Minnesota State Arts Board. This activity is made possible by the voters of Minnesota through a grant from the Minnesota State Arts Board, thanks to a legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. Thank you, State of Minnesota. Woo! Thank you, taxpayers, for supporting the arts. I'm so deeply grateful to be able to read tonight with a beloved friend and colleague, Johanna Domokos, who is making her Minnesota debut this evening. Earlier I was reading at St. Olaf College, and so I'm going to begin by actually reading a poem from my collection Interrogation Room. Then I'll read a couple poems from a collection in development supported by the Minnesota State Arts Board. And then after Johanna shares some work, we'll also be reading from Underfoot, which is the first collection of Sami poetry by a single author to be published in the United States, to be translated and published in the United States. So really grateful for the gift of being able to work on this marvelous book by this exquisite poet, Niels Holmberg. So this poem is called A House in Nicosia. And it's from my collection Interrogation. White curtains flutter as if a childish hand bats a distance, flicks plaster off ramshackle walls papered with a politician's face. In time's slow fray, he's a target, practice for tower guards, overlooking a football field of plastic bags, red spray cans. A train's outline heaves across the bleacher's height. Down concrete steps, a diaspora of feral cats, Congress. Ribbed with longing, they're the only ones who can cross. It's all guesswork, smeared in a childish hand, writing that wide and mortal pang called history, that human cry, forced from home one morning, through dust and shadow. I see flashlights, bullhorns, dogs, a crash of drawers, metal spoons and forks, a long crawl of space under pine boards, torn up revealing a secret, darkness where no one hid the money, what's left of the canopy, frames blue drapes that her husband pulled back to make love to her. Young, they left the balcony doors open. Boys laughed and kicked a ball past midnight. Now the mattress straddles the threshold like tides summoning a raft tied to the firmament. Tell me, if two loves claim this house, to whom does it belong? So, I'm a poet very much interested in that space in between, right? Borders, ways in which languages double in on each other, create another kind of space of vulnerability. I'm interested in not, I want to say, like perfect grammar or the correct way of using language, but ways in which languages mess each other up in really powerful ways. And as a transnational person from a diaspora, in particular, a person who was adopted, but who was taken from my Korean family without their permission, and grew up in Oklahoma, and he has since been reunited since 2011, learning language, Korean language, and letting my English and my Korean tussle with one another creates this powerful space of vulnerability. And so I want to read a poem in Konglish, which is Korean and English. And my work with Johanna, translating long conversations with her, she's a polyglot who works in 14 languages, gives me courage to try this out. So thank you for your many gifts, Johanna, and for giving me bravery. So this is called Konglish. It's for Appa, which means father. I'm not going to translate, I'm going to let the languages just kind of be with one another. So, Konglish, Neba Sori, for Appa. Parrot of transistors, silicon switches, 안녕하세요, blinky boxed, 안녕하세요, hello, hello. Tap, 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 parrot, 너무했어, 너무로. Tip, tip, tip으로. 서전에 searching, tap go. Parrot 들을 수 없어, 쏠 수 없어. 쌀을 찾아냈어요. Light and 피고 있어. Threads of bristle dry, 아람과 가양에서. I've separated 악기를 from its Wi-Fi throat. 너는 아기 먹어요. So that last, maybe I'll translate that very last line. Basically what I said was, I eat the baby. But Papago is Neba Sori. Papago is the translation app. And Papago, its image is that of a parrot. Some sort of, in this poem, going back and forth in Konglish, English, Korean, the experience of what it's like when you are trying to augment your Konglish using Papago, which is like Google Translate in a Korean context. Next poem I'm going to read is called 다른 denyeongda, which means to put in more, to embellish. It's a technique for pansori, which is a Korean art form of singing. It features a single Korean singer accompanied by a drum, and it's kind of called the Korean opera. But a pansori singer will perform for hours upon hours. And this tunum nota, to put in more, to embellish, is a particular technique important to pansori. 1,000 singers vie for the Dragon King's attention. Their voices shatter like necklaces of foam on the beach. I arrive late at Indangsu, freckled and brown, my utogrum untied, dictionary missing, pages I've practiced till the paper ripped and my mouth broke, the English language bit strapped to my head, the spittle, the spume, the shock of contestants, as I shake my drenched skirts of kelp and krill. My thighs shine, a flopping crow hates from a cove. I don't give a fuck that I've not cut my nails for 7 years and sliced the root from my tongue knuckles. I grip this distance, this forced removal, this pink, this meat, this offering of a drum. My teeth are rotten. My gums ache from the chafe of US leather. I'm supposed to entertain my ancestors who led me here, a mute who can't recall the Korean for this sinewed vein petal I hold to the sky. And this last poem is called Lines. Look to the left, a crow pecks out your eye. Look to the right, a general's blue blade. The way is narrow and alone, but not lonely. The 4 directions look to the one where you stand at the beginning. The treachery of shamans, corrupted by envy, the odor of their breath and dirty feet. Shame and loneliness unmake your thoughts. Hooks pull at the left. You carried a sister's altar across an ocean. She knots the threads with sharp teeth. Where harmony sits, scent of lotus and singing, a brass rattle among your gifts. You choose fragrance, an inkstone and pen. Your heart is an altar, your spine a tree. Between your legs, an offering of water before the mountains of your shoulders. Cry often, so a lotus may root and blossom. In this solitude, you cut the twine and refasten your eyes. Thank you, everyone.
such a nice bookstore. It reminds me of my childhood. My mom was a librarian, so I grew up in her library. And now I just really have a very special feeling here. And the first time they're here, still feeling at home. Thank you, Jennifer, for reading also Polish. I am a Hungarian poet who has developed also a kind of multilingual experiment in her poetry. And let me start with a translingual piece from my latest multilingual, trilingual poetry, which has an Italian title, D'arpeggio, referring to arpeggio, a musical technique when three sounds follow always each other, usually played on a harp. And by three sounds are the three languages I'm improvising. It has 5 cycles, each of them starting with a kind of poetic DNA, as you can see, but it's also really at the core where the languages just spring out. These pieces are also set to music, so but I read now the translingual improvisation. Al, fa, all, fa, alfa, bet, alphabet, beten, beten, DNA, DNA, DNA5, DNA5, muse, museum, core, all, core, chorus, Stimm, mi, Stimme, tel, mondat, mond, et, ni, el, kezd, dode, kezdő, dode, kode, code, köd, kör, gehör, lang, language, usage, tort, ein, language, tort, ein, well, hell, fogad, kit, geh, lie, kracht, bleib, breeze, freeze, ease, ish, on, tom, bomb, dom, moon, licht, la, lach, homo, homosome, szomjas szám, szív, énye, mond. But let me jump back to an earlier project. When I was arriving to LA, I had the chance to meet Astrid Preston, who is an excellent landscape painter. My colleague was Michael Heim, maybe you know him, the excellent translator and promoter of all the literatures from the world. He translated from 20 languages into English on a very, very high level, and one of his languages was Hungarian. So in this project, I had on one side Astrid Preston with her beautiful paintings, for example this one, and Michael Heim, who translated my Hungarian into English. I will start reading just a few lines in Hungarian, and then the text this ekphrastic text I wrote to the painting. Ölelésnél átélt bordó erdő, mely növekszik. Tágas vidékké, forgó gömbé. Egy gyönyörű áttöri a látás közönyét. Levegő beszívott vére, ággerinc szívvonala, állandó átszövődés, az elemek nyelvén kimondott csoda. A stretch of deep red woods, embraced, experienced, growing, it's about this paper, growing into a broad land, into a revolving orb. The blood of the air inhaled, the heart line of the bronze spine, a continuous interweaving. Such is the miracle articulated by the language of the elements in the painting. Delivered from without, then caressed and returned with gratitude. The experience of the miracle shatters the self-made filter, blunting our senses. Deep red compassion sweeping through all the colors. What material has the soul left to don? Black red proclaims a language yet unknown and holds a mirror up to us. We can see ourselves against a background of wasteland, body parts, and the always present miracle without miracle. Time in the mirror is polychromic, but we prefer to ignore that. On one level, humans are left out. On another, nature. Watching with closed eyes. Consternation. One of my eyes is crying. The other one is crying too. But let's have something more positive. This is the painting I was inspired by. I never asked Astrid stories about the paintings because I wanted to be free from her story, which led to painting, for example, these branches towards, in the background with a yellow sky. Sparkling green hillock, trees all around, a feeling of peace. It is warm, the sun is out. Two people are going up the hill, slowly, quite slowly, conscious of both movement and stillness. There is a happy avoidance of haste in their slowness, a subtle heightening of fire. For it contains the rapid scaling of the hill, the shoes, the clothes flying into the wind and light, invisible, as the two are themselves. Goodness at every step, patience, kindness, which is needed to revere the wheat, which is needed to reproduce the leaves, which is needed to remember the ever-blossoming and fruiting trees of light. The sky is near, the fragrant every grass, the fragrant every tree, the air in which everything will become light and delicate is full with the aroma. After living about 15 years abroad, I realized that whenever I write poetry, I censor myself. I censor my German out, I censor my English out, I censor my Finnish out. So at a certain point I decided not censoring my multilinguality and also my everyday life, which is multilingual. So I decided to develop this project in 3 languages, English, German and Hungarian, with the title Exile Elixir, which it's also in Hungarian or in German, pretty similar, and this cover reflects also this trilinguality of the book. It was written after we spent 6 years at UCLA in Los Angeles, and we decided to move back to Germany. And I was confronted with losing my home, gaining my new home, language loss, language gain, how to resettle, how to start a new life. And at this cross point in my life, suddenly also three motifs jutted out. From my Hungarian past, I remembered a ballad, which is in fact an archetype. You can find such stories in many cultures over the world, also in Native American tradition, also in Middle East or in Asia. It's a ballad about 12 masons who plan to build a beautiful castle, but whatever they build during the day, it collapses during the night, and whatever they build during the night, it collapses during the day. So at a certain point, the major mason decides to sacrifice the first woman who comes. And who is the first woman? The wife of this mason. And when she arrives, they touch her gently, put in the fire, and with her ashes, they manage to build the castle. So somehow this was also a little bit my feeling when my husband got a new position and the family was derooted, and the energy was much needed in order to build up the new home. On the other side, I remember this photograph, I'm sure you also know, by Charles Abbott, Lunchtime Atop. 11 men sitting on a girder high up in the sky while the Rockefeller Center was built. And somehow that was my feeling at that moment, moving into Germany back, that suddenly all my referential space was taken away. And I need to be so sure, I just need to trust myself and take the next steps. And the third motif, which came from the German literature, German culture, was a nice short story by Ingeborg Bachmann, where she describes a translator who is translating from Italian to German, but constantly she has the grammar paradigms in her head, and I go, you go, she goes, so repeating these paradigms, and that's also, it was important for me to touch also this experience and connect some motifs from Ingeborg's Bachmann piece as well. So long introduction, but let me start, and probably you will notice why I outlined for you these parallel intertexts which were important for me. The book is also a visual book. It contains streets that in most of the places they don't lead anywhere and they are just broken. It contains 42 tableaus. Each tableau was developed in 3 languages, and the units are not translations. There was always a motive which inspired me, and then I just let it come in any language and in the form the lines were coming. Sit down, observe it. Stand up, go on, observe it. Ülj le, figyeld meg, állj fel, menj tovább, figyeld meg. Sie glaubte, dass sie für ihre Stationen genug Wurzeln, Kräuter und Salz hätte. Die Namen des Zuhauses müssen ab und zu gemauert sein. I noticed that for the stations we do not have routes. Wherever you go, women with rising hearts, men with common wit, children calling them home, and they are walled up within you. And you are the 12 masons, and the 12 masons live setting off on several journeys. setting off 1 little me, 2, 3, 5, 11, little lost me, left behind with 3, with 6, with 14, with 15, 18, 22, 24, is packing, is on the road, is bringing lunch, blesses the land, rains tears, feeds the child, and all the 11 climb up the branch of nothing for the 12th to mix them together for you, the one, to see. Ebben a rombeszédben elelszórva egy töredék, bár 2 ősztekintet is várja, hogy legyen több nyelvű szavaknak könnyed szökelése egymás szügyén át a másik felé. With fractions of speech, my running rose. Life, puzzle fractals in ruins. Sources, rivers, meet in seas, while flowing, the truths of water names, and I try to understand backwards my names, increasing the multitude, the multi-attitude. Auf die Wiese, die Flüsse in Seen fließen, zurückblicken, in ihre Zeit verstehen meine Namensanreicherung, die Vielfalt. And final poems, concealing the message into other words, makes conscious the nudity in which we felt ourselves well before. The city bursts into bloom, the past turns it into a more beautiful one, and soberness expands in me to hinder the loss. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you. We wanted to also make sure that we read from the collection that we both co-translated, Niels Holmberg's Underfoot, and Johanna is going to read from the Sami, and then I'm going to read our English co-translation. So we're just going to read an excerpt, and then from there talk a little bit about how translation, especially translating together the Sami, has affected our processes, and then we'd love to hear questions from you if you have questions. So, okay.
I'm reading you the opening 3 poems from Jolke Vuodo, which we translated as Underfoot in Swedish. And Niels Holmberg is a young poet born in 1990 in Finland. Alkmi sohku, muorat noodastit hulseit, kolmasuoja tuoma. Suakit teko maalavuodait vanhemmat, tsihked luottait, laadet tšadji tahti jäälan taga, ruoftuluotta karvasis. Lea aiki mahtsat jolgide, muhto kosleat tjärrahat. Tonki kuovlu ahpait jäärat, kosleat tjärrahat. Muorra jolki ainahan talvottas. Muhto vainahusat, kenehtalas vainahusat, moolia ellit olli läfkin, ko kuahpat jolkis kielas järvat, kuollas jogat. Kiipa ei koossa hivtse jahmat jolkis, tjain njai.
The sky thickens, trees bear the flurry, the three-winged haste. Birches, like the parents of young children, hide traces, incubate a misleading question back inside its shell. Time to return to the feet, but where are the turns? You who taught me the directions, where are you, turns? A wooden leg, one can tell by the tracks, but memory, the body's memory of reaching steps, of a linguistic nervous system and rivers rich in fish. Why offer a wooden leg to a woodpecker? Is it too late to raise a child, or merely too late to ask? This must be one of those gravities. The young must know the grown to grow, or when to scratch their heads. Looking through the shoemaker's window is to mourn stones that can't fly. Barren birches, fallen rights conceal the land. A rake's tooth cracks under a boot. But yet they rise, children with ears like leaves, children with grammar hidden in their bodies. A tactic of bluebells proves every word is an adjective. Look at the meadow, the strategy. A matriarch gently sways in a rocking chair, creaking like an oarlock. She knows what she's doing. With each stroke, the boat floats closer, closer. I ask for a story, but she's weary and retires like the night mist rising off the river. I tend to the fire and sit in the chair. The boat warms me. God is a verb. Johanna, I know you've been translating Sami literature for many years. How many years has it been that you've been translating?
My first translation I did in 1993. So I was just starting my studies in Helsinki.
Yes, so several decades, or at least 3 decades. Yes, and I'm curious about how translating Sami literature has affected your artistic practice.
Thank you for this question. We have just spent a nice hour talking to students at St. Olave's College exactly about the Sami literature and also why is it special for me. My first book that I translated from Sami, it is a book by Niels Aslak-Valkeapää. It was also translated into English, The Sun, My Father. And in this book, where Valkeapää states that the sun is the father and the earth is the mother, it's important to keep in mind that for Sami people this is not a metaphor, this is the energetic reality. And that's how they also connect to these invisible powers and to different kind of interpretation what a human person is or what is our role and, or how we are really connected to the nature around us. And working with such a literature definitely supported me in keeping my connection to these energetic roots below and above. And also in contemporary, or at that time in Hungarian literature, it was rather suggested not to speak about your spiritual intuition, or there were also certain words forbidden because they were not literary enough. And also, if you are a female person, people commented that you write very beautiful poems, but it's a pity you are a woman. So that's the atmosphere of the 1990s. But through my studies, I the bird was let out of the cage. And I am still in contact with Sami literature and try to help spreading around the world. And I think we were quite successful with this book, so it had a very, very good reception.
We were talking earlier today in our conversations about how in Sami literature it is not how the word functions as a metaphor, but the word itself is a presence. And here the analog, or not the analog, but rather the referent is the book. It's not the metaphor. So that thinking about the book as a space, in other words, right? Rather than thinking about, hello? Rather than thinking about how the word signifies another meaning, is always operating in this kind of metaphorical way, and then you're translating that metaphorical connection. When you are translating Sami poetry, you are trying to translate an energy that you're encountering through the subject of the book. And I think it was so fascinating in learning about Sami literature from you and through our collaboration and working so closely with Niels, was thinking about how in Niels' work he's innovating with this Sami literature where Northern Sami doesn't have a past tense. It has a present continuous. So what's so fascinating here with this line that we see in the cover is that the line is unbroken. So in talking about a history and talking about memory, it's always this idea of the present continuous, what is constantly in motion. So it's not this metaphor of what had happened or what could happen, but what is always happening. And the book itself is the experience that you are trying to translate. So this kind of space, this energy that is very different than thinking about translations, trying to get the correct meaning. Right. So I found that very powerful.
Absolutely. Also, that special book I was mentioning to you by Niels he said it's not a book, it's a drum. And it's not only text in it, it's a yoiking. Yoiking is the oldest singing tradition in Europe. And it's more than usually, it's a kind of improvisation of vowels, so it doesn't have verbal elements, but just hey, lole, lola, hey, oi, oya. So it's an improvisation on spot, and that's how he conceived his book as well. It's an improvisation where the drum, which is now the book, reverse. This is the inner meanings. And Niels, our author, he's very consciously taking this tradition upon himself as well, and concepted his book as a drum. He even refers to this motif somewhere in the book. I know that was very difficult to translate, and you took quite a long time to finalize that version. You exchanged a lot of emails with Niels. We looked to the Finnish version of his, to my Hungarian version, and so it was. Can you tell us a little bit about how you finalized the English translation at the end?
I think it really was about listening like a poet to Niels reading his work in Sami, actually. And so when I was working on different versions, it became really clear to me that Sami, it's about the vowels. And paying attention to those vowels was absolutely essential. So that when I was putting together the translation, it was about assonance. Really paying attention to those ahs, ohs, and when you hear him reading, you can get that feeling through the vowels.
And I remember he made sound recordings for you.
That were absolutely beautiful. He was outside, it was gorgeous nature, and it was just this incredible gift that he gave this collection. Maybe we should pause and see if there are any questions from the audience, if we have time.
two different sets of multilingual. As you're saying, only more recently you've become working in Korean as well, and you speak 1,000 languages.
14.
That's 15 more than most Americans and 12 more than me. But would you say there are different ways in which the bilinguality or multilinguality shapes your poetry? Because yours would seem, or from what you were saying, seems very specifically identity, like looking at identity, looking at who am I through the language, how do I express myself? And what was lost was not what was taken from you, but what was denied you all along. And then yours, I was so lost trying to keep up with the levels at which your mind works. And so, but if you would speak to that, how you formulate in multiple languages.
I think what's interesting, and this is just speaking for myself, I think what's interesting is that when I'm speaking Korean, and when I'm in Korea, or even just in a Korean community diasporic space, it's like there are certain parts of my being that I'm able to access, that I'm only able to access in Korean. And so, also, every language has embedded within it certain ways that it privileges certain modes of being. So, like for example, in Korean, the verb ending is critical. It tells you the type of relationship. It's very specific in terms of how in the language it specifies the relationship between the speakers. And so there are so many verb endings because relationships are that important to the language. Now compare that with English. Right, thee and thou, we don't use that so much anymore. Ye, or anyway, we just don't use that anymore, right? And so this specificity of the relationship says something about privileging and caring deeply about relationships, and it's embedded in the language. And if you are able to communicate, in Korean, you have to care about relationships in that sense. And you're always listening for the relationship through the way that you're speaking with someone. So, and I know, Johanna, in talking with you a bit about, there are only certain things that can be said in certain languages. Maybe you want to expound on that a bit more.
Definitely, I also feel that I have different poetic projects or different books I want to create, and those always requires a specific linguistic playfulness, creativity, depending on what am I writing about. And there are certain topics that I can write only in my Hungarian. I must say the deeper the emotion behind it, the more it connects to Hungarian. On the other side, I also feel the need to play with grammar, with words, with the languages I encounter in my research, in my life, and it's such a fun to just look up dictionaries and think about how this might be differently translated into another language, and what the difference in between these two languages create again. So, for example, in my latest poetry collection, in this one, I have those translingual poetic DNAs, but I have trilingual parts where I try to get the three versions usually close to each other, but in each of them I kept a few moments where they differ very much. And I'm also interested, this is, an orchestrated piece. So it's like listening to an orchestra where there is the piano and the violin and other instruments, and sometimes they play the same melody and sometimes they just add something to it. I also wrote, for example, a conceptual novel. So we know about conceptual poetry, which are also, conceptual poetry is also very, very experimental, where you have shapes and patterns and all kinds of diagrams. But I decided to use, as well as space, as experiment for my novel, but also multilinguality. And I was asked to create a creative piece for a musical performance where the pieces which were performed, they always had 8 parts. So I decided, okay, then I create a novel or a short. The genre is brief roman. You know, in German it means a novel based on letters, but in English it's brief, so it's a brief story. And then I used 8 languages, and depending on which languages you understand, you get a different storyline. Or I also experimented in Exil Elixir. You saw the lines and the different units. So experimenting with languages and always finding the suitable strategy, it's for me a beautiful challenge. Also because as a scholar of world literature, I did a lot of field work in Scandinavia among minoritarian authors as well as migrant authors. And I was often, and the same in Germany, and I was struck that, for example, a talented writer from India who in India published in 4 languages moves to Germany and he writes only in German. And the German audience doesn't know about his multilinguality, about his really beautiful Urdu poems, which were also put to notes. So therefore I decided also to encourage these authors through my research, and established also Hochroth Bielefeld, a publishing house with special series for translingual poetry. This is also where we published your poetry book, Necro Citizens, both in English and German translation.
Yes, and I've always been really deeply grateful to Johanna as a teacher, the way that you have made space with your students in such a generous, capacious way, not only in terms of supporting translation and authors, but also raising up a whole generation of translators who are sensitive to these kinds of matters and have this capacious understanding of translation. So I think it's a beautiful gift that you're giving to the students and paying forward, and even in this moment here in Minneapolis. So I'm so grateful. Yes. Yes.
We can do one more if you want.
We have time for one more question. Yes.
Is there a long history of like written literature in Sami, or is it more like there wasn't a ton of written down literature in like Irish, for example, until the mid 20th century, and like the Hmong language was mostly verbal until they in the 20th century also came up with some scripts for it. So is it a long tradition, or is it something that as the world has like globalized and modernized, the Sami people have started doing more written literature?
Literature can be oral, written, or digital, and the Sami people were forced into schools of Norwegian, Swedish, and Finnish languages, and they got alphabet pretty late, so mid 20th century, and then they finalized an easier version in 1970s, end of 1970s. But the first Sami poem was recorded, or we have as a document from 1600s, 1673 exactly, from a book by Johannes Schäferus, a German scholar who was a professor in Uppsala, and he collected yoic poetry from the Sami. So we know how poetry, oral poetry, was performed at that time, and we have, if you compare it with modern poetry, it's just modern poetry. It is free verse, inner rhythm matters, there are no certain patterns like line or rhythm at the end, but a lot of consonants, assonance, and it's absolutely modern. So whenever I read those poems, it's like written by my colleague.
Thank you everyone so much for joining us tonight. Thank you again, Magers and Quinn. Thank you, Rachel.
Köszönjük szépen, Óló Kihta.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.